still leading all the polls, but Ben Carson is within the margin of error in the latest Fox News poll. He's 23 to you're 24. Why do you think he's doing so well?
I don't know. I think he's a nice person. I don't really know why he's doing well.
And welcome back to the Daily Wrap. Donald Trump may not know why Dr. Ben Carson is doing so well in the polls, but he may want to figure it out pretty soon as the gap between the two is shrinking every day. The latest NBC News online poll shows that only 5 points now separate the two. According to the poll, Donald Trump has 28% of likely Republican voters, while Carson sits at 23%. Marco Rubio, Carly Fiorina, Ted Cruz, and Jeb Bush all have less than 10%. What's more, Dr. Carson now commands a substantial lead over Trump among white evangelical voters, a critical Republican voting bloc. The NBC News poll reveals that Dr. Carson currently holds 33% of the white evangelical vote, while Donald Trump has just 23%. And again, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, and Carly Fiorina lag behind the two frontrunners, each getting less than 10%. You know, one of the things that surprises me, guys, is Ted Cruz. I would have thought that he would grab a much larger share of the evangelical vote. He has a very big religious background. His father is an evangelical minister, or whatever. How important do you think that vote has been?
Well, I think it depends on the state. So for Iowa, obviously, it's a crucial voting bloc. More broadly, though, I think the issue for Cruz with evangelical voters is just that you need to have attrition in the field. You need to have a Ben Carson drop out, I think.
Are you from the school of if Donald or Ben Carson were to drop out, that Ted Cruz is the one who stands to gain the most?
He may be the one to gain the most, or at least proportionally he'll gain enough that it will push him over. I mean, if you look at what the Cruz campaign has been very public about what their strategy is, it's sort of let's survive until the SEC primary, and then in the SEC primary, let's dominate.
Is there any chance you know the details? I don't. As to what percentage of the total, what you need to win, comes from that white evangelical base?
I don't know the percentage offhand, but it's also not just the number, but it's the intensity of support.
Right. That's right. Yeah. What about Mike Huckabee? Wouldn't he have a big chunk of that?
You know, here's the thing. I think what we call evangelicals. I think a lot of these people are very educated in effective, leadership. Sure. I think they look straight through a lot of the times. They do want somebody who's a Christian to be in the political seat, but they're looking at somebody that is effective. And I think the reason Ben Carson, this is my own opinion, I think the reason he's rising is because Jeb Bush is going down. And I think those votes are...
You think that's where the votes are coming
think that's part of them. I think Ted Cruz kind of went down. I think they went over to Ben Carson. But here's what I would tell evangelicals. I'm a Christian. Listen, Christian values are important in all these leaders, but it's time that we have a leader that is a competent leader, somebody who can go in and make changes. And don't just vote with your heart. Otherwise, you'll be no different than people who vote for a candidate just because they are pro-abortion. You need to vote for people who are well educated in leadership and task organizations.
That's a very good point, I have to say. Now, speaking of Mr. Trump, as we so often do, during an interview with Bloomberg Television, the Donald was asked how he would keep America safe. While his answer took him on something of a tangent, he did manage to blame former President George W. Bush for 9/11.
Help us understand who Donald Trump is as a man. I need to know that you will make us feel safe and you will make us feel proud.
I think I have a bigger heart than all of them. I think I'm much more competent than all of them. When you talk about George Bush, I mean, say what you want, the World Trade Center came down during his time. If you look at Sandy Hook,
you can't blame George Bush for that.
He was president, okay? Don't blame him or don't blame him, but he was president. The World Trade Center came down during his reign.
So, Joe, I mean, to me, this breaks down on two levels. Is it appropriate to play the blame game? Is that good politics, number one? And number two, is it fair?
It wasn't a knock at George W. Bush. It was a knock at the Bush family, and because he hates Jeb Bush.
Yeah.
And Jeb Bush is always the number one target because he sees him as the biggest threat because he has the most money, he has the most establishment backing, and ultimately he sees him as the biggest threat, not Ben Carson. So every time he takes a shot at George W. Bush, he knows in some way he's hurting Jeb Bush a little.
But Jonathan, how does that resonate with the voters of the Republican voters? Mm-hmm. I mean, you would have thought if you were just tuning into life that he was a Democrat picking on President Bush.
Well, I think people are in the Republican Party. I may be going a little bit too far out of the line here, but I think a lot of people in the Republican Party are tired of the Bush dynasty, and I think
isn't that kind of? I mean, listen, I'm the Democrat here, but isn't that going over the line? I don't blame George Bush for 9/11.
I don't blame him for 9/11 either, but you know, there were a lot of policies in place at that point in time that maybe not blame it on George Bush, but there were.
I just think it's unfair, but I think it's hilarious that he said I have a big heart and George W. Bush is incompetent and 9/11 happened as well.
My heart's not that big. All right, we want you to share your thoughts on Donald Trump and Ben Carson by going to newsmaxtv.com/comments. Coming up next, it's that time. We're going to read some of your viewer comments. Be sure to stay right here with us.